Chapter 15. Professor Slocum was at his desk, busily at work amongst his books, when two bedraggled and heavily bearded travellers appeared at his French windows.
"Come in, lads," he said cheerily. "I'm sure I do not need to inform you as to where I keep the decanter."
"Do you know how far it is to Penge?" asked John O'Malley.
"I've never troubled to find out, although they tell me that it's very nice."
"Oh, very pleasant," said Pooley, "but a fair hitch from Brentford."
"My apologies,"
said the elder, when the two men were both seated and clutching at their brimming glasses.
"But you see, I had no wish to force your hands over this matter. I was not altogether certain that if I simply confronted you with the truth, you would believe it. Rather, I considered that if matters were simply allowed to run their course, your inquisitiveness would get the better of you, and you would involve yourselves. My surmise was accurate, I see."
"As ever," said Pooley.
"You quite suit the beards."
"Soap Distant doesn't own a razor."
"Apparently, he hasn't grown a hair on his face in 5 years.
"An interesting man,"
said the professor,
"if a trifle eccentric."
O'Malley's attention had become drawn to an elaborate brass device which now stood upon a pedestal in the centre of the professor's study.
"What's that body?"
he asked.
"An orrery," said the old gentleman. "I thought it might interest you."
"Preeminently," said O'Malley. "I find little in life more interesting than an orrery."
Professor Slocum raised an admonitory eyebrow, but after a moment of brief consideration regarding the deprivations suffered by his guests over the last few days, he lowered it again.
"Let me show you,"
he said, gesturing towards the instrument. The two men grudgingly rose from their comfy chairs, carefully bearing their glasses.
"It's a mechanical device of great age," the professor explained, "demonstrating the movement of the planets about our sun and their relative positions to one another during their endless journeys."
He drew their attention to a brazen sphere.
"Here is the Earth," he said, "and here is the legendary planet Ceres. You can see that its path of orbit lay exactly between those of Mars and Jupiter, where is now to be found the asteroid belt, 5th planet from the Sun. I have no wish to labour this point, but might I explain that although it was a comparatively small world, its mass and density was such that its destruction caused a chain reaction in our system which had a very serious consequences hereabouts."
"So we heard." The professor began to hand-crank the amazing piece of machinery, and the brass globes pirouetted about the central sphere in a pleasing dance ronde.
"Here, upon the small date counter, you can follow the time scale of each yearly revolution."
Pooley and O'Malley watched the years tick by as the tiny planets spun on their courses.
"Now here," said the old man, halting the mechanism, "is where the catastrophe occurred. You will notice the alignment of the planets, almost a straight line from the Earth. With the destruction of Ceres, the gravitational effects would have been shattering."
Pooley noted the date upon the tiny brass counter. "The time of the biblical flood," said he.
"Precisely. I personally subscribe to the theory of Ceres' existence and of its destruction," said Professor Slocum. "It ties up a good many historical loose ends, and I will go further. It is stated in the Bible that after the waters of the great flood subsided, God set his bow in the heavens as a sign that no such event should occur again. I believe that the popular view that it was the rainbow is incorrect. Rainbows must surely have been observed before the time of the flood. More likely, I think, that it is to our moon to which the Almighty alluded. The lunar disk's journey, describing as it does a bow-like arc in the sky each night."
"Has a certain ring to it," Pooley agreed. "But what puzzles me is to why these Setians should choose Brentford of all places as a landing site. I take it that by what Soap said regarding gravitational landing beams, this is, in fact, the case."
"Indeed, yes. Brentford has been singled out as a target. I thought originally that it was Soap's network of tunnels which had drawn them, but I find that the Setian tunnel system extends beneath a great part of the globe. My second thought was that some great centre existed here in the distant past, possibly a previous landing site, but I can find no evidence to support this."
"What then?"
"I feel it to be the influence of the Brentford Triangle."
"The Brentford what?" both John and Jim replied. The professor poured a scotch from the crystal decanter, and seating himself in a fireside chair, did his very best to explain.
The borough, which is Brentford proper, he said, exists within the bounds of a great triangle. The sides of this figure are the Grand Union Canal, the Great West Road, and the River Thames. These follow the courses of three major ley lines. As you may know, these are lines of subterranean force which, although never having been fully explained, nevertheless appear to exert an influence upon the surface of the planet. I walk the boundaries of the borough every day, and I have doused these lines many times. They never move. The ancients knew of their existence, and aligned their tumuli, barrows, standing stones, and circles upon them. Apparently they believed that the power should be tapped, and could be tapped. Sadly, down through the centuries, man has built across the layers, interrupting their flow and nullifying their power.
So, said Pooley, if the power of the layers is lost, why do you attach any significance to this Brentford Triangle business? The Professor tapped at his nose, and for the first time both Pooley and O'Malley realised where so distant had acquired the habit.
Simply because mankind appears to have lost touch with the lay's power does not mean that other creatures also have. Certain are still susceptible, the most obvious being our feathered friends.
Doubts? Queried Pooley. The Professor ignored him.
I have written something of a monograph upon the subject. Migrating birds inevitably take identical routes each year, and these invariably run along the major ley lines of the countrywide system.
This all seems a bit iffy, O'Malley remarked. Are you suggesting that Syrians, like birds, navigate by ley lines?
I am suggesting that an advanced civilization such as theirs must surely have discovered them, and here at a time when they were uninterrupted. As the lines appear never to move, they are surely ideal for navigation. The maps of Earth no doubt gather dust in the Syrian ship's computer banks even now, so to speak, ready when required.
I suppose it's feasible, O'Malley conceded. But even so, why choose Brentford? Why not Avebury, Glastonbury, Stonehenge or somewhere? The Professor rose from his chair and crossed the room to where something rested upon an ornate Victorian easel which was covered by a green baize cloth. Drawing this aside, he exposed a large mounted map of the district. The lines of the great triangle had been inked in red and stood out clearly.
Impressive, said O'Malley, but as you say, hardly sufficient. It would certainly seem more logical that the Syrians would choose one of the better-known lay centres of this country. No, there is something more here, some inner pattern which I am failing to observe. I am sure it's staring me right in the face, but I cannot find it. Something is shining out like a beacon into space, guiding these beings upon their way.
Pooley and O'Malley followed the old man over to the map and stood peering over his shoulders. They turned their heads from one side to the other, made as to speak, then reconsidered, traced the courses of the streets and pointed variously at random. At length they looked at one another and shrugged.
I cannot see anything, said Jim, just roads and houses, shops and pubs.
With the mention of the latter, two pairs of eyes turned simultaneously towards a great ormolu mantel clock, which obligingly struck 5 o'clock.
It's nearly opening time, said O'Malley. I've been a week without a pint large. Possibly, Professor, we might continue this discussion over a refreshing bevy or two.
The Professor smiled gently and withdrew from his desk a folded map of the neighbourhood.
You certainly deserve a drink, he said. And here,
he took out a crisp new £5 note.
Have it on me.
Pooley accepted both map and fiver.
Thank you, he said. This is most kind. Will you not join us for one?
I think not, said the old man. Study the map, though, and employ your wits. I ask only one favour. Please bring me £1 worth of silver from the Swan's cash register. From there and nowhere else. Do you understand?
The motive or the request?
The old man smiled and tapped again at his nose.
One question, said O'Malley, as he and Jim were turning to leave. Suppose by the vaguest of chances we had to discover this pattern. What do we do?
The Professor shrugged his ancient shoulders.
No knowledge is ever wasted. You know my methods. I never make a move before acquainting myself with every last piece of relevant information.
Yes, but Jim made a rustling sound with a £5 note.
We will be in touch, said O'Malley.
Good luck, said the Professor,
returning to his desk.
I shall look forward to hearing from you.
John and Jim wandered off towards the Flying Swan. At least one good thing has come out of all this, said Jim after a while. Then you will kindly enlighten me as to what it is, because it certainly slipped by me in the heat of the moment. Well, said Pooley, at least now we know that strangers upon the allotment are not from the council, so we can continue our game. You are wise beyond your years, Jim, said O'Malley, dealing his companion a weltering blow to the skull.